Coming up on Look What I Did.
Building a brand new house around a log cabin as old as the Civil War. And it's not just a fence, it's a hand-built work of art made of steel, plastic, and a father's TLC. Plus, the staircase that proves copper piping isn't just for plumbing anymore. Next.
I'd never heard of anything like this next home, which was actually built around a log cabin standing since the 1800s. Some have even said Abraham Lincoln might have stopped by once or twice. Pretty cool, huh?
Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Jody Barrows. We're from Springfield, Illinois, home of Abraham Lincoln.
The front of the home may look normal, but wait till you see what's inside.
We took an 1830s log cabin and built our home around it.
Jody had always wanted a log cabin either detached from our house or at least a wing off the house.
My friend called me to say that he and his wife had driven by this old ramshackled house, which he had heard through the grapevine was a log cabin underneath the green tar paper.
We came to find that the gentleman who originally owned it, Henry Yates, just happened to be the father of Richard Yates, who was the governor of Illinois from 1856 to 1864.
Henry Yates was a close friend of Abraham Lincoln's, and when Henry Yates was running a general store within our log cabin, Abraham Lincoln was running his general store in New Salem at the same point in time.
We negotiated a selling price with the owner of the property. We negotiated them down to $400, which just happened to be the same price that the house with the property sold for in 1832. We spent 10 weekends, my son Josh and I, to dismantle it to the point where we could load it on a truck and then move it over here.
The pieces that were moved were basically the log walls, the original flooring. We moved a couple of the early doors, and I believe that's about it.
Once we had the foundation in for our new home and the subfloor for the first floor down, we then moved the truck back in and we reassembled the logs with the help of some good friends of ours on the subfloor.
And built the house around the cabin. This is the main front entry hall to our home. This hallway leads into the log cabin.
We're standing in the heart of our home. This is the original red oak logs that we found at the log cabin site. The longest log is 24 feet long. That's up at the top. They range in thickness, but they're typically 7 inches thick. We stacked the first layer of logs on the subfloor directly, and then we started layering wood blocking and stacking the second level and so on for the rest of the logs. Once all of the logs were in place and secured, we then applied the wire lath. We then installed the mortar into the wire lath. It took 2 coats, then broom finished. We sealed the logs and we had a finished product. The window shutters were also made by my son and I. The window box is a combination of 2x8 rough framing behind it. We have full-width pine boards at the jambs and the head. We have walnut trim at the face trim and at the head and the sill. And then the window shutters are also made of walnut. We took rough sawn walnut barn siding, cut it to a dimension we could work with, and then we planed all of the wood down to a single thickness. We then routed out the stiles and cut tongue and groove pieces into the stiles and rails, and did something similar to that with the beveled panels, center panels. Cut those to dimension and then ran those through a table saw at 10 degrees to give it the bevel that it has. Once we completed the beveled edge on the center panel, we assembled the center panel within the groove area of the stile and rails, and then we clamped those in place when they were glued and nailed. The hinges are H hinges, they're reproduction. We have two pieces here, and then we have two hinges that connect into the jamb portion of the window box. We use the log cabin room as our primary great room and casual space in the house. We oftentimes read the paper in there, have coffee on Sundays. We light fires in there in the winter. It's our family room and the center of our home. We spend a great deal of time in here, and we really enjoy it.
Still ahead, using paper-thin walls and exposed studs to upgrade your upstairs. Plus, turning a construction mistake into perfect concrete kitchen counters. And coming up next, two hands are better than one. But when you're building a fence by yourself, sometimes you just have to improvise.
If you live next to a street, you might have a fence to protect your home from traffic and prying eyes. Well, if you're tired of picket fences and can't stand chain link, then grab some steel and a couple power tools and get inspired by what this dad did.
Hi, I'm Michael Antonora, and I live in Austin, Texas. I live on a busy street, so I designed a courtyard so we had some privacy from the noise and safe places for my kids to play. I didn't want just a fence. I wanted something that was really going to break down the form of the house, which is very long, and give us something really interesting at the center of the house. So what I created here was more of a gate. It's a trellis, it's a pergola, and it's a nice composition on the outside of the house. As I started the remodel for the house, I noticed that the house had some craftsman style and bungalow style details and scale. So I picked up on that, and then further still picked up on one of the influences for the bungalow style, which was Japanese architecture, which led us to this, which is essentially a large abstraction of a Japanese tea lantern. Now, the way that this is all put together is really quite simple. We have redwood frame, we've got 1" by 2" by 1/8" steel frames, which I welded. I've got the cast acrylic, and then I have the overall door frame. Working with steel as a material is actually a lot of fun. It's something I'm not that familiar with. I'm kind of learning as I go. I cut the steel on a chop saw that I found at a flea market. And then gradually just went through and welded each piece together. I'm not a welder, so after we put it together, some welds were less than perfect, so took a grinder, smoothed things out, which made it much easier down the road to paint. After I constructed the frame, I drilled the holes for all the bolts. As I was drilling, I made sure I used a lot of oil so that I didn't burn the steel or burn the bits. One of the other challenges of the project was I did most of this work myself, and I had to figure out ways to where I could put things in place with one pair of hands. So what I did was I took a piece of wood and I clamped it to the bottom of the door or bottom of the beam that I was placing the frame on, and I lined it up and put a line there that was essentially the level that I had to put it at, and I just used that as a little shelf, and then I could tilt it up into place and I could do it all with one hand. A very important part of this project was to understand that I have three very, very different materials. Each of those materials expands and contracts at very different rates given heat or cold. So in doing that, I had to make sure that I allowed for some of these materials to slide past each other and move at different rates. After I constructed the wood frame, I came back and fabricated each of these panels individually and then installed them individually. I cut the acrylic with a special blade, which allowed me to make a very smooth cut without chipping. I left the paper on as I did that when drilling and when cutting, because that reduces all the damage to it. Attaching the panels was a little bit of an invention. I knew that I had to let these things slide, so I found some nylon washers that were essentially plumbing washers and some regular carriage bolts and put it together in a way that allows those panels to slide very easily. The acrylic is a cast acrylic, and the significance of that is this is made to be an exterior material. It lasts long, it will not fade, and I've got it in the color that I wanted it. It's really worked out well. My kids can come out here and play. We don't have any worries about them getting out or anyone coming in here. It's got some privacy. The courtyard took me roughly 3 weeks. I did it over the course of 3 weekends. The materials cost less than $2,000, and I think it took me about 30 hours worth of work. The best part is the way that my kids interact with it. They love this space. They go out into the courtyard, they eat their lunch, they go out there and draw. They really, really love this house.
Coming up next, using transparent walls to lighten up a room. Plus, a room with an ocean view no matter which wall you're looking at. Stick around.
These next two homes got metallic makeovers, and the results were anything but normal. Check it out.
Hi, I'm Mark Mitchell, and I live in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York. I took my outdated staircase and rebuilt it using plumbing materials. Sounds kind of funny, right? Come on, you gotta see this. This is my new copper railing in my living room. When you enter the house, the first thing you see is the staircase. So I wanted to improve it and make the entrance more interesting and more contemporary. I decided to use copper in the staircase because I've always thought copper was a beautiful metal. It has a rich, warm feeling. Also, copper as plumbing tubing and connectors is relatively inexpensive. The railing cost roughly about $350. First, I sat down and did a bunch of sketches to figure out what I wanted the staircase to look like. Then I went out and bought the copper tubing and connectors. I used this 3/4 inch tubing not only to improve the aesthetics, but also to make the railing safer so no one would fall through. Then I took my plumbing tubing cutter and cut the tubing to size. After I did that, I fitted the connectors on to the tubing, drilled holes, and tapped the holes so I could put these brass screws in so that I could hold everything together. Then I came back with a torch and I soldered the sections together, brought it up here, and assembled it in place. After I finished the copper railing, I started looking around the hardware store for some other materials to see what else I could make. And the result of it was this steel coffee table, which I made the structure out of electrical conduit and used glass for the surfaces. I'm really happy with the result of the railing. It becomes a conversation piece, and it's a real story.